Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We have a pretty nice discussion today with Jacob Ward. He is the author of this book, The Loop. And I was telling him that as soon as I finished reading this book, I tried to find his email. It was not possible. Then I talked to a friend of mine who could reach out to him over LinkedIn. And then we made this possible. I'm very thankful to Jacob to have accepted to participate in this discussion today about this idea that he lays out in this book about three concentric loops. One that is more related to what we are biologically speaking, and then the second loop on top of that one that explores this first loop for certain gains, and another third loop that is really the problem. He will explain to us this nice idea. We are going to have about 35-40 minutes of a presentation for his ideas. And then we go for a discussion. As I would like always to remember, this series of discussion is partnership between the Institute of Computing here in Campinas, São Paulo, Brazil, from the University of Campinas, and also the Department of Informatics in Rio de Janeiro from the Catholic University in Rio, here today represented by Professor Marcus Endler, the director there. And I'm your host today. I'm Professor Anderson Rocha, Director of the Institute of Computing. And our special guest here today is Jacob Ward, as I said. He is the technology correspondent for NBC News. He has reported on science and technology for CNN, Al Jazeera, Nat Geo, and the Discovery Channel. And he is the host of PBS's landmark documentary series, Hacking Your Mind. The former editor-in-chief of Popular Science magazine, he has written for the New York Times, Wired, and the New York Times Magazine. And he lives now in Oakland, California, the previous home of the Golden State Warriors basketball team, for those who follow basketball. So, Jacob, thank you very much for joining us today. The stage is all yours. We will be here quietly listening to you.
Okay, thank you so much, Professor Rocha. I really appreciate this. Boa tarde, everybody. It is one of my great dreams in life to visit Brazil. I had this dream once upon a time that, for a moment I thought maybe I can come and do that, but we have to do this virtually. Someday I hope to meet many of you in person. So I'll talk about the loop. Let me first sort of talk about what inspired this book and the fear that I developed that I wanted to explore in it. So, boiled down into a sentence, the book is about the ways in which our brains make us vulnerable to putting too much trust into technology. So I did this documentary series. It was about the ways in which we make most of our decisions using an ancient automatic decision-making system and how we are not aware of that most of the time in our lives, and how we are being more and more manipulated over time by marketers and political campaigns and all sorts of commercial interests on the basis of that. Then, for my day job at NBC News, as Professor Rocha mentioned, I'm in Oakland, California. We are, I'm within a half hour's drive of most of the major tech companies that Meta, Apple, Google, the rest of them, and the huge constellation of companies that are working on AI for all sorts of uses and purposes. And as I was speaking to companies that develop AI for my job as a reporter, more and more I was bumping into companies and experts who were deploying an understanding, not quite a command, but an understanding of behavioral science to make really big and important decisions for people. Decisions like who gets a job and who gets a loan and who goes to jail. These are the kinds of things that AI is being deployed to do, as everyone here knows so well. And so when I looked at those two things together, the fact that we make most of our decisions using an automatic decision-making system that we're not even aware of, and the idea that all of these companies are trying to create automated decision making systems for us, I thought there's a problem here that I haven't seen people really explore before, and I would like to try to write a book about that. And so that is where this came from. So the loop, how technology is creating a world without choices and how to fight back, is the result. So I'm going to just sort of walk you through a handful of concepts that for me were very important in sort of thinking about this. So the first is, I used to be the editor-in-chief of a science magazine, a very big science magazine here in the United States called Popular Science. And one of the things that we talked about almost all of the time was traveling between planets. It was a constant theme in the coverage that we did, the articles that we did. And so when it turns out that when you really talk to people at NASA and other space agencies about what it takes to get from one place to another, you'd learn that it's very difficult and very dangerous. So for instance, this is Mars, right? The surface of Mars, which is about 300 days journey from Earth. And that depends, of course, on how far apart they are in each other's orbits, right? But it's about 300 or more days to get there. So getting there, incredibly difficult. Now let's think about this planet. This is an artist's rendering of the nearest possibly livable planet that we know of, and it's called Proxima Centauri b, where you are on our planet. You at night can see this constellation. I cannot up in the northern hemisphere where I am, but down in Brazil, you should be able to see Centaurus. I don't know what you call it there, but Centaurus in English, right at the front hoof of the Centaur, there is a star there called Proxima Centauri, and it has some planets circling it. And one of them is this one, Proxima Centauri b. And it is, in theory, a planet that is close enough to the sun, to Proxima Centauri, and big enough, the size of it is the correct proportion, that it really could be a place that we might be able to stand on and breathe a livable and survivable atmosphere. The estimate is that it could really be like a nice day on Earth, on that planet. The thing is, this is, like I say, it's the closest possible planet to get to, but that really doesn't mean anything, because as the closest possible planet, it is still 4.2 light years away, which in the huge distances of space is like right down the street. That's like next door. But when it comes to actually getting there using our current technology, it would take an incredibly long period of time. The estimate is that it would actually require about 137,000 years of space travel in order to get there. And what that means is that if we were to actually launch a ship today and try to get to that planet, it would be entirely inconceivable that the people who left the planet would be the same ones that ever got to Proxima Centauri b. In fact, 137,000 years means 2,000 human generations would pass. 2,000 times we would be born, live, and die on that ship before we could possibly get to that planet. And in fact, at NASA, there is a concept called the generation ship. There's like a handful of people who study this concept, and it is the idea that we would in fact have a ship with enough people on it that we would reproduce and grow, have children and then die, and then the children would have children and they would die until we finally got there. The point of this is to say 137,000 years, that is about as long as we have been around as modern humans. That's about as long as we have ever been the kind of upright, creative thinkers that we associate with being human. And so if we really think about 2,000 human generations going by on a ship, what that means is that we would have to take the entire history of modern human civilization, Egypt, Rome, all of it, right? And bottle it on this ship to get to this other planet. And so that is why when you hear from people like Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk and the rest that we're going to somehow travel to another planet and live there, my answer is no, that's not actually going to happen. Instead, we are on the generation ship currently. And when you think about all of the difficulties that we might face when it comes to planning for 2,000 human generations on a ship, what would we wear? What kinds of technology would we bring with us? How would we create a set of rules that would govern us for all that time, such that we were a peaceful and enlightened civilization when we finally landed on that other planet, you know, we're not great at thinking in generations, and we need to start doing so. We need to start thinking the way Darwin was able to, about how generations and generations and generations of humans and other animals evolve over time, and what we're going to be doing today that might affect our children and their children and so on. And so for me, the generation ship has been a way of kind of thinking about how all of that works. So because it is such a fragile ship, we have to be very careful about how we deploy this. So when I think about AI as something that we are deploying on something like the generation ship, I think of it as something that we really have to be very careful with, because right now we are building guidance systems that shape our choices. And we are going to be turning those systems loose, right? Unleashing them inside the ship without realizing how enormous the effects will be. Maybe not right now, maybe not even next generation, but in a couple of generations, the effects could be enormous. And we have to think about that today. So before I go any further, let's talk about what AI is. And I'm going to rip through this pretty fast because you guys study this and you know all about it. But for me, when I'm trying to explain to people who know nothing about AI, one of the things that I try to communicate to them is just how simple it really is. So this is the example I use. When you're trying to, let's say you're going to ask a piece of AI to look at photos of, or let's say look at, footage of cows and footage of dogs, and try to tell the difference between cows and dogs. You show it, right, a bunch of these examples, you show it some of the guidance data, right, that has some of the training data that tells it what the answer is. And what I think your average person does not understand is that the AI is just using patterns to label the data. It is not developing an expertise in cows and in dogs. It is only finding the simplest possible patterns to distinguish between the two. It uses whatever patterns it can find. And very often, depending on how these systems are designed, and of course, you know this, even the creators of the systems often don't understand what patterns the AI is using to make its choices. So in this case, let's say that the AI just decides to use size as one variable and slobber as the other variable, right? Drooling, the amount of drool that comes out of its mouth. And it might say, oh, okay, all of these animals are bigger, whereas these animals are wetter, right? They drool more. And that's how it will then draw this line between cows and dogs. And in the end, the AI really is nothing more than the line between these two categories, such that it can say, these are cows and these are dogs. And for me, I think this has been one of the simplest ways for me to get across to people who don't know anything about this, that these systems are not experts in the thing that you show it. An AI doesn't know anything about dogs or cows. It only knows the very simple patterns that distinguish between the two. And the fact that most people, I would say the vast majority of people, have no idea that that's the case, means that they are especially vulnerable to believing that AI is more sophisticated than we realize, than it actually is. So when I started looking at this question of okay, what kinds of systems will it, what kind of uses will AI be put toward? I started to think about, okay, what are the patterns in human behavior? And I don't know if this is true in Brazil, but in the United States, if you point a camera at a sporting event, right, at a game in a stadium, at drunk people, they get up and they dance. I don't know if this is, maybe it's only us. I know it's true in many other countries. I don't know if it's true in Brazil. And to me, this is one of those things where humans understand, oh, right, of course, if you point a camera at drunk people at a stadium, they'll do something silly. But it is not necessarily the case that they understand that that means that there's in fact a whole world of human behavior that is pattern-based. And even though it feels like human behavior is so random, right? It's like the surf, right? It's like water rushing around us. The truth is, it's in fact, our behavior is incredibly pattern-based. And so the question I began to ask was, is any behavior random? Or another way to think of it is any behavior, human behavior, random enough that an algorithm could not find patterns in it? So I began looking around and I had trouble finding anything that an AI couldn't work on. So here's one example. In the United States, about 50% of US couples, husbands and wives, partners, of all stripes, divorce. And the reasons they break up are so consistent that, in fact, there's an acronym for it. I can't remember it off the top of my head, but it's money, time, and children are always the top reasons that couples break up. And I, in fact, then began to talk to a company that was being used by what we call family courts, the courts of law that you go to when you are getting divorced. And these family courts were beginning to use an AI system from a company called Co-Parenter to guide the relationship between newly divorced couples that had just gotten divorced. When people were fighting so much that they kept coming back in front of a judge, back to family court, the judge would eventually say, okay, now you're going to use the Co-Parenter app to communicate from now on. So what you do is you text and communicate with your co-parent, with your ex through this app. And as it looks at your communications, it begins to spot patterns in the communication. And so what it will do, for instance, is if you begin to write to, let's say, if I wrote to my ex-husband, right, or whoever it is, and I say, you lying piece of, I'll never give you another dime, and I start to write bad words and angry things, the app will interrupt me and say, are you sure you want to write that? Instead, why don't you try this language, or you can also speak to a counselor if you need to. It recognizes what I'm doing and says, I don't think you want to do that. It's going to get you in trouble. And in the same way, if I'm writing with him and I say, okay, I will pick our kid up from karate on Tuesdays and you pick him up on Thursdays, then the Co-Parenter app will also interrupt and say, it looks like you two are about to enter into an agreement. Would you like to use this pre-written language for making a contract that you both agree to? That's how predictable newly divorced couples are in their behavior, is that a very simple piece of AI can spot in the language they use with one another the patterns of agreement and disagreement. And here's the crazy thing, it really works. The estimate is that about 85% of couples that use this app settle their differences out of court. They never have to go back to a judge to settle their arguments anymore. The app does its job. We spoke to people who use the app and they say, we get along like we've never gotten along before. We don't fight like we used to. And we are, as a result, creating a better relationship and a better environment for our child, which is the whole reason that we want to use this. So to me, I think that's fantastic, amazing. It works right now. But here's my question. In a generation, will we depend on this? Let's say that this kid, right, grows up only ever seeing his parents use an app to communicate effectively between them. What will he know about communicating with difficult people in his life? How will he know how to have an argument successfully without a robot coach helping him settle these disagreements? So you can use this kind of thinking, it turns out, to think about all sorts of things. And before we go any further here, let's get back to that question of cows and dogs, right? Because the technology, does it actually know us? Does it know anything about us? Or are we just hardwired and incentivized to believe that it does? So by this point, I am sure that you are familiar with the work of Joseph Weizenbaum. He was a researcher at MIT who studied, he basically created ways of, he created the first chatbot, essentially. It was a teletype machine that you could type things into and it would kick responses out of a script back at you. And he used it, he was trying to figure out, what do I do with this that will let human beings interact with it? And so he dressed it up as a therapist as what was called at the time Rogerian therapy. And it's an old school kind of therapy where when I say something, the therapist just mirrors it back at me. He reflects it back to me. So when I say, oh, I'm very tired, he says, oh, why are you so tired? Well, my father is bothering me. Why is your father bothering you? Right? You can just go back and forth like that. So he first put this system to work on his secretary. He had his secretary sit down and she began to write in, men are all alike. In what way? Well, they're always bugging us about something. Can you think of a specific example? And within a few minutes, his secretary turned around and said to Joseph Weizenbaum, you see him pictured there, I need you to leave the room. This is too private a conversation for me to have with you. And it was so successful at getting people to say all sorts of very vulnerable things into the system that within a few years, the American Psychological Association was predicting the end of human therapy. And Carl Sagan went on TV and predicted that this would all lead to robot therapists, that we would go into phone booths to do therapy. You know, all of that stuff, amazing. The trick, of course, is it's not, none of it really knows us. This isn't real therapy, right? This is anthropomorphism. This is the term in English. I don't know what it is in Portuguese, but it is attributing undue sophistication to a system that we don't understand. So when you don't understand a thing, you think it is more complicated and sophisticated than it is. And the thing is, Weizenbaum, he quit the field. He was so terrified by what he had built and the effect that it had on humans. He said, I will never build a system like this again. And he died in the 90s, living back in his native Germany as an environmental activist. He never built computer systems again. When I tell this story to people in Silicon Valley now, they very often just say, they say, well, this was a great business. Why would Hugh have, why wouldn't he have, turned this into a business? And I say to him, that's not the point of this. So the truth is, we are not just using AI to figure out things like what, music we should listen to or what video we should be looking at next. Right now, there are billions of dollars being spent all across government in the United States and across insurance companies and job application companies, so many different companies that are all focused on trying to hand over important human decisions to government programs. The Transportation Safety Administration, which in the United States is the program that figures out airport security, spent $1.5 billion on a failed program called the SPOT program that was supposed to basically try and pull people out of line based on using AI, based on whether they looked suspicious in some way that the AI might be able to determine. It did not work. And yet we're seeing billions spent on facial emotion recognition, on AI-driven decisions about who gets insurance, right? Who's got risk or not. DARPA, our big research project at the Department of Defense, is spending billions and billions on the uses of AI. We're using AI again to decide who gets a job, who gets a loan, who goes to jail. And the reason, I think, is not only is it faster than human choice, it also keeps us from having to make the kinds of decisions we don't like to make, right? Both decisions that are boring and decisions that feel bad, right? That are hard to make, that we don't like making. So here is an example, and I'm not sure if this was something that happened that made the news where you are, but in the United States in 2017, an airplane flight was oversold. They sold too many tickets for the flight, and they needed to pull a couple of people off. And so they asked for volunteers to get off the plane. And nobody volunteered. And so they said, okay, we're going to draw names out of the computer. The computer is going to choose the names. The computer chose 4 names and 3 people got right off the plane. They said, okay, the computer chose me, I'm out. But that 4th person was a doctor. And he said, I can't get off the plane because I have to be at work in the morning where we're going to help patients. And in the United States, it turns out he was right. You cannot actually pull a doctor off a plane when he's going to be on duty the next morning. But they said, the computer's chosen your name. You got to get off this flight. And they brought in police from the airport, and those police beat this man up. This was unheard of in the United States, but they beat this doctor up. They yanked him off the plane. He broke his collarbone, he broke his nose, and it was a disaster for United Airlines. That was the airline that did this. But what it also, I thought, was so interesting about was when the police officer who had been involved, who did the beating up, he then sued United Airlines and the airport, and he said, we were not trained to deal with this situation. And he was made fun of by the local news reporters and TV news. But when I looked into it, he said, I was not trained to push back against these orders. When I'm told that I have to pull this man off the plane, they didn't tell us whether to hold back a little bit. They said, get him off at any cost. And what I think is that Joseph Weizenbaum, if he had been on that plane, he would have said, everybody, you think that the computer has chosen this name and therefore that the system is perfect and that you should obey that system. But that is not true. Right now, you're all giving up the best parts of your brain in order to make this decision. Don't do that. Instead, let's talk it through, right? He would have brought the human back into it. And so for me, it's an example that we lose our way when we do this. So now there's really this larger question here, which is anything irreplaceably human, right? Is anything so complicated in human behavior that AI can't find patterns in it? Well, I'll tell you right now, I haven't found anything that is like that. So in art, I've talked to art historians who are using AI to fill the gap between things in the architectural or archaeological record that we don't have. So if there's two pieces of pottery 1,000 years apart, the AI can try and fill in the gaps in between. And of course, there are people using AI to make all sorts of art. This is a story, I'm sorry, the connection is not strong enough for me to really show it, but an artist that we interviewed who was using AI for generative portraits. He fed about 10,000 oil paintings that he liked into the AI as the training set, and it began kicking out these sort of medleys, these mixes of oil portraits, and he would just nudge it in one direction or another until he liked the result. And at the time, a philosophy professor wrote a big article in the United States about how this was not real and it's not real art because it's made by a computer, blah, 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 blah. Well, turns out it doesn't matter because this guy went on to sell this at Sotheby's in London for $50,000. And so my argument is it doesn't really matter whether we think it's art in an academic sense when the market shows that people will buy it. People will accept it as art, at least in as much as they'll exchange money for it. And that to me, I think is a very notable thing. Then if you look at music, music is in many ways the simplest thing to simulate using AI because it's mathematical, right? It is, all music can be measured in 7 dimensions: pitch, duration, dynamics, tempo, timbre, texture, and structure. You can plug those into a piece of AI through training data, no problem, and it can kick out very convincing seeming music. So for instance, here is music that Huawei created. I'm going to pause this. I don't know if you can hear the audio, but it's too loud for me to talk and listen. But Huawei, the Chinese phone maker, did this as a demonstration project. They just wanted to show that the AI on one chip could in fact finish Schubert's unfinished symphony, and it did. And it sounds incredibly convincing, and it really works really well. And ever since then, I've been talking to a million different companies that are using AI to create the kinds of music you see in commercials, or the kinds of music that they say will promote some sort of emotional response in a movie. Very, very common thing. And then writing, there are companies using the patterns in what amateur writers compose to find hits. So this is a woman I interviewed for NBC News named Anna Todd, who was one of millions of people who write every day on a platform called Wattpad. It's a Canadian company. And Wattpad basically uses patterns in what people write to predict what's going to do well on its platform. It then takes the winners of that system and hands them to production companies, to Netflix, to book publishers, and these, a handful of these writers get to be world famous people. So Anna Todd has a multi-picture deal at Netflix now. And what's interesting is Wattpad is now owned by a Korean company called Naver. It's the Google of Korea. And they are going to use that same kind of system along with the sort of stable diffusion and DALL-E systems that we're seeing now to let anybody create graphic novels that then get selected by AI in the same way and go on to become a published thing. And their hope is to create become the world's largest exporter of movie and of sort of cultural ideas using this sort of system. So all of this stuff, right? You can weave AI into all of it because human taste is easy to imitate and human choice is easy to manipulate. It's all a matter of finding and predicting our patterns. So when I think to this generationship idea, right, those 2000 human generations, I think then, okay, what is going to be the effect on our children and their children and so forth? And so this is what I think it's going to look like. I think that algorithms are going to analyze our preferences and our behavior right now. That's the training data set that's going to go in. Then it's going to narrow those down to a handful of options that they're going to then, it's going to then hand on from there. We then choose from those options. The algorithm reads our preferences, right? This is, let's say, 6 months from now, a year from now, whatever it is, and generates at that point a shorter list of options. We choose again, and so forth and so on. This is, in my view, the loop. This is the whole concept of a circular pattern of shrinking choices. Now, some people believe that AI is going to free us from work and create a more open society in which AI and the choices it creates for us are like this circling, are like the heavens, right? The sky going overhead. My worry is if we're not careful about how we build this system, it's in fact going to shrink our choices. It's a downward spiral staircase. And at the bottom of that staircase, I worry that we're no longer going to know how to talk to our kids. We're not going to know how to make jokes on our own. We're going to be wearing, one color and we'll have no sense of humor. You know what I mean? Like, I just worry that it is taking away human agency. Now, I could go on and on from here, but I think I'm going to pause there and let our discussion begin. I have a whole section about some possible solutions, or at least some ways we should be thinking about solutions, but maybe that can come out in our conversation, if that's all right.
Awesome. I think that it's going to be easy. Yeah, you closed the sharing. Let me put myself here on Spotlight as well. All right. So for everybody in the audience, please type your questions over chat, and Professor Marcos and I will follow up here. Marcos, welcome. I was trying to talk to you earlier, but I thought that your audio was not working. So welcome.
Yeah.
You are on mute now. You say something. Oh, now it's okay.
No. Yeah, I can start. So, Mr. Jacob, so thank you very much for this very inspiring talk, and which makes us to reflect on what we are doing as scientists. So hopefully I don't work so much in AI, it's more in IoT, but anyway. But why do you think that we trust so much the AI and the machines that we are using? So because if the tools are very simple, like a hammer or something, then we have some kind of trust that we know how to use it, and we at home we have also TV set and radio or whatever. And why with AI we have, as you mentioned, so much trust that this decision is the right decision and that we have to stick with it. Could you comment maybe on the difference? Because the original idea is maybe that the computer systems with AI could be a tool for helping us.
Right. So I really appreciate that question. For me, I spend about the first half of the book trying to summarize about 30, maybe even 50 years of recent behavioral science. And one of the big themes that comes out of all of the behavioral economics and behavioral psychology and even sociology of the last 30 to 50 years is that we seem to have inherited a way of making decisions using very, very instinctive systems. So there's a famous book called Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman. And that book and his work has made an enormous impression on me. Now, he argues and he builds this theory on, a century of research before him. But his argument is essentially that we are built by nature to not want to think about things very long. Because if you think too long, the leopard eats you, or you don't eat the food fast enough and the other tribesman gets it, or whatever it is. And so there are so many places, and throughout the book I go on and on about all of the different amazing experiments that people have done to show that not only do we make decisions using these instinctive automatic systems, we have systems that scientists are just barely starting to figure out for passing information between humans in an unconscious way. So if a snake comes into your office and I'm sitting with you, we don't talk to each other and say, what kind of snake is that? Is that a poisonous snake? We both go, bah, and we run, right? We are built not only to make that decision about it, but it turns out, and there's this fantastic researcher named Beatrice de Gelder, who's described at length in my book, who has discovered that when my face goes, with the snake coming into the room, your face catches my emotion off of my facial expression, and your face unconsciously will do the same thing. And together we then look at Professor Rocha, and he does the same thing. And before we know it, we have communicated that we have to get the hell out of here, right? So there's a whole body of work that shows that decision-making is instinctive. Then out of that work came a whole other body of work that shows that we also love to hand our decisions to other systems. One of the systems that they have found is one of the most powerful and irresistible systems is our emotions. So if you have, for instance, a positive emotion about a risk that you are about to take, then very often you will misjudge the amount of risk involved. And this, it turns out, is one of the main reasons that skiers are crushed in avalanches. They usually get crushed in avalanches of their own making because they look at the slope and they say, woo, this is going to be awesome. And they don't think, how risky is this slope? How much of a risk is there that the snow is going to go away? And in fact, the snow rescue people that do the professional skiers and ski rescue people are taught a whole system for doing some digging, some experimentation to check out the snow. And it specifically says in those instructions, there's a manual, it says, do not use your emotions to make this decision. Your emotions will get you killed. And for me, when you speak then to marketing experts, they say that those emotional decision-making systems that we like to hand off to, we don't want to think about it, we just want to think about whether it feels good or not. That turns out to be a fantastic way for people to sell you food, to sell you a political idea, right? That is the basis of marketing now, is to use that emotional system to take over your instinctive systems. My feeling is AI is another one of these systems that we love to imagine can make better decisions for us. If you talk to people about what it's like to try to hire someone into a job right now, and I know the two of you as senior people in a department have had to do this many times, hiring somebody is very, very tedious and hard and risky. You don't know who the person's going to be, whatever it is. And so the explosive growth in resume-based AI filtering systems, right, has to do, I think, with people not wanting to deal with that at all. And my concern, of course, is that we are going to see more and more that we just hand this stuff over. I just was sent a pre-publication paper by somebody yesterday that showed experimentation that showed that if you train AI on people's opinions, political opinions as a group, and then you use the AI for future polling, it will, I don't know if this translates, but if you use the AI basically to ask questions about how people will vote, the AI will tell you what those people will do in future. And so the idea here is that they could maybe replace human questioning processes, right? The whole polling process with AI. And to me, I go, oh no, that's no good. But it's another place in which we want to hand these things over when they are difficult or tedious or, you know, and I think especially when they feel important. And so to me, I think that there's, it's not that the AI is the problem. I mean, it is the problem in a way, but how our brains developed to rely on outside systems is how we stayed alive for tens of thousands of years. But now it's going to get us in trouble when we have these sort of half-built AI systems that claim to be able to make important decisions for us.
That's very good. But as you mentioned, it goes like in the work of Daniel Kahneman, the two systems, one that's like lazy, so to say, but it helped us over like generations, probably like half of those 2000 generations that you mentioned, we needed to do this, right? But back in the 60s, we had like I strong belief in behavioral psychology, like everything happens and then there is a penalty or some sort of incentive. And this was like mainly headed by Skinner. And then came Chomsky, and he said that things are much more complex. But when you talk about these things in terms of the loop, it still feels like most of what we do is behavioral. And it seems that this complex part is like a little bit far off. So how can we, as you said that you had some more discussions on this, how can we make use of these discussions of Chomsky that we are indeed more complex than just like rats in a lab responding to some incentive or some penalty? How can we break the loop?
Yeah, so, oh boy, you know, so I think that for me, one of the things that I have noticed in all of the companies that I deal with, as compared to all of the academics that I speak with, is how different they move in terms of speed, right? The academics spend years and years and years funding a study, getting permission for the study, publishing the study, then other scientists have to replicate the study for it to be considered true, right? All of that. I then go and spend time with researchers inside big companies, and they are moving, you know, they consider a thing established and ready to rock in weeks, right? And they are moving so fast in that way. And while the academics say, okay, we need to investigate some of the very basic, simple challenges of building a system, and we need to sort those out before we move on. In companies, they are incredibly quickly deploying systems to do things like, you know, spot a possible criminal, right? Or spot someone who is not going to pay back a loan, right? They're moving very, very quickly. And so for me, I think that if we really are going to recognize honestly the complexity of the world, as you say, we need to move much more slowly and deploy these systems on much simpler problems. So for me, when I look at, you know, people often say to me, how can you be so critical of AI? It does such incredible things. And I say, you are right. And there are amazing things that it can do and that I am happy with it doing. And those are things like spotting cancer in a photograph. It has been proven, right, at this point, that an AI system can spot cancer, a tumor that might become cancerous, better than a human operator can. And so for me, I think that's one of those things where that's the cow and dog kind of thing, you know, like, yep, you know, it's simple. That's a very binary use of AI. And to me is really a good one, you know. It's when I meet people who want to use these systems to do much bigger, more morally complicated things that I think, oh, that's no good. And here is the other part that I think we just haven't really built into the thinking about this yet. So Daniel Kahneman, right when I was finishing the book, he published a new book, and it's my nightmare. It made me, when I saw this, I was like, ah, you know, when it happened, because he wrote a new book, and his book says AI can make us into better versions of ourselves. It can help to solve the problem that he identified, which is we have these two systems, system one, system two, fast thinking, slow thinking, and the instinctive system versus the lazy system. We can make the lazy system stronger if we use AI to lift ourselves up. And I read that and I thought, you know, I admire him so much and his work has been so powerful in my life, but I think he's so wrong about that one thing. And the thing that I think makes him wrong, the thing that I think he has not taken into consideration, is money. Nobody's making money making this part of our brain stronger. They make money making the more instinctive part of our brain stronger. Playing on our instincts is how we make money in a capitalist society. It's why all advertising looks the way it does, right? It's why political campaigns work the way they do. And so for me, I think that we have to also look into how money is really, you know, money plus AI is creating a set of incentives that I think are going to make us, you know, it's going to make us a worse version of ourselves rather than a better version of ourselves, because the worst version of ourselves is easier to sell stuff to. And so to me, I think we have to understand that and build it into our thinking about this stuff in order to avoid, hopefully, some of the pitfalls that'll come with that.
The book that you're talking about is Noise, right?
Yes, right. That's the thing. He's in that we can
the part that
better.
I also, I love it, the other one. And then Noise is a really good book about the use cases and the things that we decide differently. But then he thinks that AI is going to be like a way of activating system too, which I also, I don't think so.
I mean, it could be, but it could be a way of creating, of activating system too. But I was taught, so there's a researcher I was speaking to who was talking about a problem that he and his group of researchers were thinking about, and they called it the heroin problem. And the problem was, if you have a piece of AI that you're going to build to be like a personal assistant for a person, what happens when that person becomes addicted to heroin? Will that personal assistant help you facilitate your heroin addiction, right? Or will it tell you to get off the heroin, right? We don't know what that's supposed to look like yet. And so I think Kahneman just hadn't thought about that part of it yet.
Marcos.
Yeah, Jacob, I think you mentioned a point which is very important, which is the money or the business related to AI, where the companies want to sell. But I want to ask you another point. I mean, there's some difference in a way of thinking, in a way of behaving from one generation to another generation. So my father was a mathematician, and he was very calm and was relaxed and was always thinking about these things. I'm also academic, but we have to deal with many things. So, and my son, he does multitasking. He's also having a good job. But I think maybe we are losing this ability to stop and reflect about some things. All things are very fast. We get many information, and so this AI fits very well to this schema where the S1 is promoted and the S2 is left alone. What do you think about this?
I think that's absolutely correct. I mean, I was talking to the head of security at a major dating site, one of these app companies that puts single people together. And she was telling me that there has been a huge surge since the pandemic in scams on these dating apps. Usually it's people claiming to be somebody else, making somebody lonely fall in love with them, and then tricking them into buying cryptocurrency or something stupid, right? And it becomes this scam. And she said that more than 50% of the people who are scammed turn out to be Gen Z and millennial users. So these are not the stereotype of your grandmother being fooled by these people. This is young people. And I said, well, why would that be? Aren't these the people that grew up with this technology? Shouldn't that be a way for them to understand this better? And she said, it's something about the trust that they have in the relationships that they have over technology, over an app like this. They assume that if the communication is happening inside the app, then it must be safe. And we try to tell them over and over again, no, don't, everybody, we don't know who anybody, try to be careful. But I think there is, and again, it's the incentives. We have built these systems to reassure people, this is normal, this is fine, right? In the United States, we are and I'm sure this is true in Brazil as well, we are full of concern about the effect of technology on small children, and the degree to which we should be allowing children of a certain age to have a phone or use an iPad by themselves, whatever it is. And a recent study found that the majority of US parents are getting their sense of what is normal for their children's technology use from the advertisements of the companies that make the technology, because there is no agency or organization in the United States that can get the idea across that we don't know yet what a normal amount of usage is. But we also know that that especially with children, the effect of technology on the brain is totally different than anything else. So I was talking to one of the big researchers in technology and children at a university in Seattle in Washington State, and he was telling me that your average 3 to 6 year old child will play with their favorite toy for 20 to 30 minutes. And then they get bored and then they stop. But their absolutely favorite toy in the world, about 20 to 30 minutes. With a game on a phone or an iPad, they will play for 90 minutes or more. And he says that suggests that it is not fun, it is not enjoyment, that's not pleasure, that's something else. It's a different category of brain activity. They don't know what it is yet. But because he is an academic, right? We were talking here about academics versus companies, right? Because he's an academic, he believes, he has to wait and publish a study and then have the study be replicated before he can, in theory, say to the family that's in his office what they should do with their kid who can't get through a dinner without a screen in front of them, right? And he says, on the one hand, as an academic, I want to wait and say to them, if you wait 7 years, I can tell you the answer, right? But we can't wait that long, right? Too late. And so I think that there is something very different happening, especially to a younger generation of people right now. And that is because we like to think that these systems are normal, but it's just because I think that they touch a part of our brain that even as adults, we don't understand is being touched, right? It's petting a part of our unconscious mind that we don't have insight into yet. And that, I think, it is changing the way we think. And what I hope, so if you like, I can get into, I put a lot of faith in the courts, and I believe that there will be a lot of lawsuits that are going to maybe be part of how we solve this problem, at least in the United States. I don't know how liability law works in Brazil, but here in the US,
same thing.
If you can prove, yeah, right, if you can prove that the company should have known better and that its actions did harm and that it knew that there was harm being done, you can get a lot of money out of these companies, so much so that you can shut them down. That's what happened with cigarettes. And I think that some of that is about to happen with technology around kids, around people who are addicted to gambling. I think a lot of that is about to start. And that's where I put my hope for changing that.
So, Jacob, can you go over this question from Thais? Do you think that the idea of AI or technology in general being neutral might be one of the reasons why we trust it? Do you think looking more at the human behind technology and how they shape it can help us to understand technology better? And this goes in line with a recent book that I'm reading, Human-Centric Artificial Intelligence, which is like a new way of doing AI. It's like considering AI not as like something to replace us, but something to complement us, more like augmented intelligence and not artificial intelligence.
Yeah, I think that it's a wonderful concept. And Thais, thank you for this question. It's a really good one. So my answer is yes, I absolutely believe that we should be thinking about who is making these systems as much as we think about the systems themselves, because at least here, so often the people making the systems are people like me. They are white, male, upper class people who've had very little experience of inequality or injustice in their lives. And they very often talk to me about technology as being a neutral, a neutral force, a neutral system. And they also very often have what I would consider libertarian political ideas about how, we just need to make the best possible product in the market we have under the circumstances that we're faced, that face us, and anything else is intellectually false. So for instance, I spoke to a person inside a company that made loans, very small loans to people using AI. And I had heard from other people that this company was experimenting with trying to make these loans in a much more fair way. Because in the United States, we have a long history of, especially when it comes to things like home loans, excluding Black and brown communities from those home loans. And as a result, you have, in cities like Oakland, where I live, you have Black communities that have been held back from any kind of real intergenerational wealth for 100 years or more. So I was asking him about this, and I said, I understand you were sort of experimenting with changing things so that you weren't as neutral, and instead we're trying to account for the history of inequality in the loan making systems. For instance, I had heard that they were taking people's last names out of the process. They were taking people's addresses out of the process, which were in the past ways that very biased things had happened. And he was very interesting. He said to me, not only do I think that we shouldn't do that, I think it would be immoral to put your thumb on the scale, right? To push down and change the outcome to try to make up for past injustice. He said it would be unethical for us to do anything except try to make the best possible product in the market that we have. And I hear that kind of response a lot, even though there has been demonstrated a huge amount of unfairness and inequality in American society. You have a lot of people making the systems that Americans are going to use to decide who gets a loan, who gets a job, who goes to jail, who believe that somehow they shouldn't get involved in thinking about what has been fair or unfair in the past. They think, I'm just going to make the best possible product, and it's not up to me to make sure it's used fairly. I also hear this from people who are making military systems. When I say, is it really ethical that you should be building a military surveillance system or a police surveillance system? They just say, if there's a market for that thing and I can make a functional product, that's as far as, I'm just the engineer. It's the people who deploy these systems and then the people who make the laws around these systems. If they want to get involved, fine, but I just am the engineer. I'm just going to make this product. And I think that is a false neutrality that people are pursuing. And it's one of the reasons I'm so pleased to be with you here today, because the people watching this, you are all going to be the ones who make these systems. And I think if you come, I think when we look back at history 25 years from now, there will be this moment where we'll say, oh, there was that time when everyone thought you could be neutral about this stuff. And that got us into a lot of trouble. And then a new generation came along who realized, oh, there's a huge amount of inequality and injustice in the world, and our AI systems need to reflect that. And we need to be looking at who is making the systems in addition to how those systems are built. So yes, I think it's very, very important to look at who is making these systems.
Very important points, but I really think that this is the generation that needs to discuss it. Otherwise, the next one will have much less options, and perhaps they will be already shaped to think that that's the normal, right? I have now Pedro. He asked if he could do the question out loud. So Pedro, please go ahead. Let me put you here on spotlight as well.
Thank you, Jacob, for the presentation. I should say you that I didn't read the book, but I like the presentation, the ideas, the thinking, very, very nice. And you started from this idea that we don't know how we ourselves are making our decisions. How we are acting, what base are acting inside, what happens inside. This, I think that I use it to think very much, in fact, that what is happening inside in the sense, but this is not a reality in general. In many situations, we do decisions, and it's difficult to understand what inside caused this decision, right? This is a reality overall, I understand. I like the idea of you presenting the Occam, a kind of Occam hazard, right? Regarding how the systems are developed, AI systems are developed. Sometimes I feel it's not quite the reality. It gets the simplest model possible. Sometimes it has the tendency to memorize the data, as we say, and this is like generating a more complex model than a simpler one. There exists a simpler one, but sometimes the end-up model is not the simplest one if it has overfitting on data, for example, right? Mm-hmm. And but the main part here I like to consider, to ask you, is regarding this general idea that in some sense we are being fed by AI. The same way we are feeding AI to do the tasks we want it to do. In your sense, when we are using it, in some sense we are being fed, like in a recommendation system that gives us specific kinds of contents, and in some sense we are tend to consume more and more of this same recommended contents, and we like, and we in some sense we are shaped by this content. And reflecting about this is very, very interesting. And my question is in the sense of how much important socially and for us, for humans, would it be to have this explanation of why an AI system is taking one decision, and should we have like a guideline for the developing and using those systems? In the sense, the system should give not only the answer, the recommendation or whatever, but also why this recommendation decision is being made. And as an example is a music platform. As a user and knowing a little about the systems, I would love to know why the one platform recommends this music for me. What are the music that I like that end up here? It would be a nice information in this sense, but regarding the questions. Thank you very much.
I love that. I think that's a very, I love that. I think that it's absolutely right. You know, because I think it is not in the business interest of many of these companies to know how these systems work. And in many cases, the way that they have been engineered, as you say, you know, it's not even clear what rules it is using or whether it is the simplest or a more complicated way of doing the thing, right? It is very hard to inspect the insides of these systems. I would want us as a society to simply agree that we want transparency, that we want to see inside these systems, because I think everyone would agree if you ask them, you know, if they have a glass of wine in them and you ask them, would you want to see how this system is making decisions about whether you got a job or what music you were into? I think people would say, oh, sure, I would want that, right? But I also think that people have been fooled into the convenience of not knowing and not understanding. You know, that is part of why TikTok, I think, works as well as it does. It's the constant surprise. It's that constant feeling that the system is, like you say, feeding us, you know, stuff that feels good and you don't know why. There's a magic quality to that. So I want to believe that there could be some sort of social agreement that would create transparency, but I don't think that's going to happen. I think what can happen, though, is you are beginning to see in American courts that companies are getting into trouble for using AI systems they don't know how to inspect. And more, if the result of the AI's decisions winds up getting the company in trouble, they can't just say, well, we don't know how this thing works. They have to be able to explain it. And so I was just talking with a law firm. There's a new law firm here in the United States whose whole business is going to big companies and saying, hang on, before you use this piece of AI to determine who gets a bank loan, do you know why it's making that decision? And the bank officers say, no, I have no idea. There was a study recently that not only did it's like 65% of CTOs at major companies in the United States have no idea how the AI is making the decisions it is. And even more of them, of that number, 70% of them don't care, right? They don't even want to know. Right. And for me, they're only going to care if a judge makes them care. And so this law firm has now come along and it gets paid huge amounts of money by big companies to advise them on which AI systems they should use, what questions they should be asking about how it makes decisions, what kind of white paper they should be presented with before they go with it, so that they have a way of defending themselves in court to say, look, this system works the way it's supposed to. It's making decisions that are fair and equitable, right, and not discriminatory. So I think, I hope anyway, that the courts will force companies to be more transparent about this. That won't make TikTok more transparent, I don't think, but I wish it would. You know, that's my hope.
Thanks a lot. I have two last questions. So one is from Marcos. Would you agree that with AI, we are replacing the human common sense by the pattern sense? That's a good one.
Yeah, that is a good question. Yes, I think that's right. I mean, I think we are, yeah, pattern sense. I think that's right. I mean, I think we see this, you know, certainly in, I mean, what I think we're learning, one of the things that I have learned from writing this book and talking to all the people I have, is that common sense, in a way, is pattern sense, right? Like, it's one of the things that we do really well as humans, is we spot patterns. You know, there's that famous experiment where in the middle of Manhattan, if you are walking down the street and you look up at a building, everybody around you just pushes you out of the sun, out of the way, and it's like, why are you stopping?
Exactly.
But if you take 5 people and you have them all look up together, then the whole block starts looking up. We all look up together because, again, we catch patterns from each other, from our faces and from our behavior. And so I think, yes, and the problem with AI is that I think it will make us even more pattern based and less able to say, what are we all looking at? You know, what is that? You know, and so I worry that as money and AI come together to build these companies, there's going to be more and more of that sort of pattern decision making, and less of the creative, rational decision making that we use when we are our best selves. Yeah.
And to close here with the question that I have next, it's like you mentioned that one of the ways that we can deal with these problems of the loop is that we need time to process, we need time to think, which means that we need time to read and to discuss with others, to be in diverse environments so we can hear different thinkings, different ways of seeing life, right? And this is why probably in the universities, it's the best place to do that, because you have people from all over with different backgrounds and you can do that. So the question from Marcos now, the other Marcos, is how can we improve the awareness of the shortcomings and incentivize people to be responsible about the use of AI and to adopt correct practices, be it in companies, or as educators or as researchers? What can we do to raise awareness about this problem and to help people break this loop?
So, I mean, I should just say to you honestly that I do not know. I don't know how to really change this. And if I did,
that's why we are here together.
Yeah, that's why we are all here together. That's why I am grateful that we are speaking to each other. I do see little pieces of activity around this that make me hopeful. So we've talked now a couple of times about the ways in which people are inventing ways to punish companies for bad behavior using technology. And gambling is a big one that I'm focused on right now. I'm thinking a lot about companies that are, there's a whole category of companies that create these casino simulators. They create slot machine, poker, blackjack simulators that you play as an app on your phone. It costs money to play, but you cannot win any money in real life. And yet, I've interviewed a couple of dozen people who have lost their whole life savings to these systems because they are so addictive. And on the one hand, you want to look at those people and you want to say, oh, they're just stupid. But no, it turns out they are very, very normal. And Facebook and others have created a whole way of finding those people perfectly for the social casino companies. That's the name of the category, social casino, that make money off them. 11 of the 12 top grossing games on Facebook are these kinds of games. Candy Crush is the like third or something, but the rest of them are all this kind of game. And so those companies are now being sued by groups of people who have been addicted using a single lawyer. And what they're doing is they're being able to look inside those companies and see, oh, they knew these people would get addicted. They knew the best way to find them, and they knew the best way to design a game to be as addictive as possible. And all of that required AI, the use of AI. So these companies are about to start getting punished for having used this and for having had an effect on people's behavior. I think of that as one category of behavior that's really interesting and could be a way of changing the incentives of these companies. I also look at people in the environmental movement who are looking at how you take liability for pollution, some kind of terrible manufacturing process, whatever it is, and make that company responsible not just for the effect today, but the effect over the course of many, many years. We're seeing that in places that have had big oil spills. We're seeing that in the places where people have put big, oil wells in an environment that is very vulnerable. And there is new kind of law being thought of around, especially in the age of climate change, where we're thinking about what is the long-term effect of bad behavior by a company on the environment. And together, those two things feel to me like the beginning of something where we could start thinking about what did a company know and how long will it have an effect? And I hope that those two things together can make it so that we start thinking about AI in a more sensitive way and in a longer term way. I know it sounds naive, but I also have seen in the United States and around the world, people come together and make enormous changes in how we behave against all logic. It just takes time. And I interviewed one of the people who created the peace agreement in Northern Ireland, the Belfast Accords, the Good Friday Accords. And he described to me how it took 10 years for them to even figure out where everyone was going to sit in the room. 10 years to have that conversation, just to be satisfied that we're going to sit in the right places at the table. And then from there, they started talking about the Belfast troubles. And they sorted it out, but it took 25 years, And to me, I have great faith in our ability to make change. I just don't know that it's going to happen as fast as the people who are making systems to make money off them. And so I'm trying to be patient about it, but that's how I think about it.
That's very good. Very nice discussions. Thank you, Jacob. Thank you, Marcos, for being here with us. And everybody in the audience, thank you very much. Jacob, thanks a lot.
Thank you so much, everybody. I really hope,
Bye-bye.
Let's do it again. Let's do it in person another time. Thank you so much.
Sure.
Bye-bye.
That would be awesome. Thank you. Bye-bye.
All right, take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.